Good morning. I'm going to start here today. There are quite a few headlines to talk about, but one, and we'll talk more about this in the outlook. But Hurricane Laura made landfall here earlier this morning, southwestern Louisiana. You can see a couple of images here. If you follow this kind of thing or interested in the tropical weather, this was a quite unusual storm that developed from. Was just still a tropical storm even back on Tuesday, and rapidly, just almost explosively developed during the day yesterday and made land. Ended up as a high-end Category 4 hurricane, 150-mile-per-hour winds. The strongest. As you can see here from the right-hand side, this is a radar loop from Lake Charles, and by the way, it looks like the radar station at Lake Charles, which is where the National Weather Service has its forecast office there, that part of the world. It looks like the radar failed at one point, but you can actually see the eye as it's coming on shore here. Near Cameron, Louisiana, I believe is the name of the town there, close by. But this storm just went from almost nothing to almost a Category 5, remarkable strengthening. And that's what the water temperatures in the central and northwestern Gulf of Mexico in the low 90s, so almost like bath water. And another example of what can happen when you have that fuel ready there and available. So the big question, of course, for us is, unless you have property down that way and thinking along those lines, is there going to be any influence? And the long and the short of it is no, probably not. For Michigan, the trajectory that the storm, though, is taking is one that when we do see a visit from a residual of a hurricane or a tropical storm, it does take a trajectory right towards Michigan, but as we will see, it takes a deflection, a real sharp right-hand turn here. But there's a lot of other things going on here especially in terms of moisture that I'll get to in just a second. As we look here to the last week, it's very, very summer-like conditions across virtually all of the state. Temperatures ranging generally from 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. That's here on the left. The bigger story, I think, for many, especially in the southern part of the state, has been just the lack of moisture here over the last several weeks. In some cases, we have precip deficits going all the way back to June, and as a result, soils have become unfavorably dry, and depending on location, again, quite a few symptoms of moisture stress, especially on well-drained, coarse-textured soils. That's pretty visible from view from the highway. The totals here during the last week, and like they've been for much of the last couple of months, higher in the northern part of the state. The yellows here are 2 inches or more, and you can see for portions of upper Michigan and a few spots in the northern lower, more than very, very generous rainfall totals here, over 2 inches, but they decreased rapidly to the south. And there were still places here in the southern few tiers of counties that were missed. And that theme has repeated itself over and over here during the course of the growing season. This particular graphic goes through 8 o'clock local time yesterday morning, and there was additional rainfall here with the system. You can see some of these bands here from northwest to southeast. That's the rainfall that came yesterday, and we did get some very, very beneficial rainfall, especially in the central and southeastern or the eastern part of the state. But it dries off for the south central and southwestern lower, once again, little or no precip. That's going to change. The good news is here we are looking at probably the best chance for rainfall across the southern part of the state that we've seen in some time. Degree day totals seasonally with the warmer than normal temperatures, not surprising, are still running typically 100 to 150 base 50 units ahead of normal for this time, with a surplus over the entire state and most of the regions, turns out, and will very likely will end with a surplus as well. So there are no issues, nothing like what we had with the race against time last year after all the late planting. Very, very different situation this year, and again, still running a surplus of degree day accumulations. We're looking here at our forecast, quite a bit to talk about. This on our weather map this morning, you can see another frontal boundary. It's actually the same one. It's just never really gotten away from Michigan. It's wavered back and forth, north and south across the state here for the last several days. The good news is when you have these frontal boundaries here, and it's a dividing line between a very, very hot, humid air mass, a tropical air mass to our south and west, and then a cooler, drier Canadian origin air mass to the north. When you have those large changes or differences, a gradient in conditions, you also have a lot of chances for precipitation. And that's what we've seen here for the past several days. That will continue for the next 24 to 36 hours before we see a major change. On the radar time lapse here for the last hour, you can see not much out there yet, but that's going to change rapidly here as we move into the overnight hours. And on the map here, just keep an eye on this. This is, again, Hurricane Laura, still over 100 mile per hour winds with this storm as it makes its way northward towards us, at least in the same direction. By tomorrow morning, you can see that we've got that frontal boundary now expected to be across the far southern lower, but there will be the likelihood of showers and thunderstorms developing here late tonight and into tomorrow with this system. There's a lot of moisture for this thing to work with. And getting to thinking about Laura here to our south, typically when we had a visit from a tropical, the remnants of a tropical storm here earlier this season in May that did bring significant rainfall to portions of the region. This one though, Laura, is once it gets up to here southern Missouri, it's going to take a real sharp eastward or right-hand turn and then move towards the mid-Atlantic and bring most of the moisture with it. I guess for the folks that are in the path of this, and this is especially true, you can see tonight it'll be towards Little Rock or so, making its way northward. And then with that curve, it's expected to go across Kentucky and Virginia and then back out in the Atlantic. Interestingly, it may actually hold together and become a tropical storm once again in the Atlantic once it goes back out to sea. But for us, very little of any impact at all. But the good news is there's, especially for those needing rain, lots of moisture here to work with, and we will see widespread rainfall, especially across the southern half of the lower peninsula, again, beginning probably in the early morning hours, continuing through the day tomorrow. There's a chance with the dynamics, and one of the other pieces of this is there's a fairly strong, for this time of the year, upper air disturbance going through, and all these things are sort of happening at the same time. So while we don't get the true hurricane-related type of precipitation, there will be still lots there to drive precip or drive showers and thunderstorms. We could see some of those actually cause heavy rainfall, maybe even some severe weather. That's a possibility tomorrow afternoon into the evening hours across the south. But generally, we're just talking again about a widespread rainfall event. By Saturday morning, you can see that most of the activity has moved off to our east. We will see showers gradually coming to an end in the eastern part of the state during the morning hours, and then for the rest of the state clearing and noticeably cooler and less humid as Canadian origin air mass moves in for the rest of the weekend and actually into next week, and sets the change for a pretty major overall change in our weather pattern from what we've been stuck in a very, very summer-like type of pattern, and we're going to move more to an early fall type of pattern. There's actually cool enough air with this air mass coming in. We'll actually see some lake effect clouds in certain western parts and northern parts of the state here on Saturday, but temperatures falling from today. Today will be the warmest day definitely of the next week and maybe beyond that, with highs generally from the low 80s in the far north to the low 90s, and it will, with lots of humidity in the south, the heat indices will be up probably the mid, maybe even some upper 90s, so very, very uncomfortable across the southern part of the state today. But after that next air mass moves in here by Saturday into Sunday, temperatures back into the 70s, even some upper 60s for highs in the north, and then lows falling back into the 50s. So big, big changes in temperature, cooling off coming, and that will be with us probably for the bulk of next week with temperatures at or probably a little bit below normal in terms of the statistics. One of the big changes here, looking at the expected rainfall totals here, and these are actually potential rainfall totals. You can see the highest ones for a change are in the southern part of the state, where in some cases 2 inches or more of rainfall is possible. Almost all of this precip that you're seeing here is over the next 48 hours. And I would also remind you, this is the potential. We won't see rainfall quite this widespread or heavy over the area, but it is possible. We do see a few spots that pick up 2 inches. I would say more on the order of a half to 1 inch totals is what we're looking at for the southern half of the state. And again, Some of that's tonight. More of that will be tomorrow and then into early Saturday. But definitely the best chance we have had in that part of the state for several weeks. And so look for some major changes, at least in terms of moisture here, before too long. The expected rates of potential evapotranspiration here for the coming week, given the cooler temperatures are dropping off, and you can see in most areas the weekly totals ranging from about 0.8 to about 1.1 inches. So that translates to daily average rates somewhere on the order of 1/10 of an inch to maybe 0.12 of an inch or so in the south. And that's actually going to be a little bit below what we see. We've been on the other end. We've been warmer than normal and had higher than normal rates of PET over the last several weeks, which didn't help where we didn't have enough moisture. But with the cooler weather and coming probably lower rates of PET. And this is in response to a question we had to follow up on that on where do we get information regarding this potential evapotranspiration variable and what is it? Well, real quickly, just to go back and follow up on that question here, the number that we get with that map and the one that you see from EnviroWeather when you look at these potential evapotranspiration rates, the actual number here is in this particular relationship here, sometimes called ET0 or PET. It's a reference value, and what it represents is the atmospheric or the meteorological conditions that particular day. What could, how much evapotranspiration could take place from a well-watered, grass-covered level surface? And it's a reference value because what we have to do, of course, then is relate that to your own situation, whether you've got a corn crop, which is in a V8 stage, or you have a tomato crop, which has just been planted. All of those are going to vary in terms of their particular rates of evapotranspiration because of where the crop is. And the way that that's done is this K sub C, this crop coefficient here. We've got a multiplier. And so the key is to know what is my crop, how far along is it in the growing season, and then what is this crop coefficient. You can see the little graphic here that illustrates that, how that changes during the season. There are many, many tables. And so what I'm leaving you with here are a couple of references. And like to step further here, there's quite a bit of work that's developed this type of information for irrigation scheduling at MSU. And you can see here the MSU irrigation scheduler. And just as importantly here, for an MSU extension resource, of course, we know Lyndon Kelly, and we've talked about him. One other one, a person that you haven't met or maybe have just met, Dr. Yung Suk Dong, who is replacing Steve Miller. And many of you know Steve. And just wanted to put a shout out to Yung Suk here and have his picture here. He is a person on campus with the Department of Biosystems and Ag Engineering that you can reach to get more information on this particular topic. Again, a couple of reference and links down here below. You can go back and look at the recording here to get these, but there's a lot of information on, again, finding those exact numbers, as well as the irrigation scheduler itself and the spreadsheet if you want to do this on your own. So lots out there. Well, finishing up here with our forecast, as I mentioned, a big change coming here over the weekend in terms of temperature. And if we look at the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlooks, a very, very different jet stream situation forecast for us here coming up into early September, a big trough. And this looks much more like fall than it does for late summer, certainly based on what we've had recently. But with this big trough, you can see there are expectations underneath that trough, certainly of cooler than normal temperatures. Michigan is sort of on the eastward fringe of this, and as you can see, even some above normal temperatures, which you would expect to downwind side of the trough over the eastern part of the U.S., contrasting with cooler than normal to our west. We're going to be somewhere near the dividing line. My guess is actually, if anything, we'll be on the cooler side of this. So if I would have put these lines in here for this particular graphic, I probably would have moved the cooler than normal temperatures a little bit further to the east, including part of Michigan. Just as importantly, or even more importantly here, we are also looking at elevated risks of precip totals and more frequent chances for rainfall than we've had, and heavier as well, and a strong likelihood of that indicated both in the 6 to 10 and the 8 to 14 day time frame. So that's a fairly significant change. Then the next question is, how long does this pattern last? The answer probably is it's probably temporary, maybe a week to a week and a half in early September is what we see. So Dennis, that probably will help a little bit here in terms of getting some moisture back and at least into the top of the soil profile versus what we've had here recently. But there should be moisture in many areas to work with, at least during the next 1 to 2 weeks. So big changes coming, but they're probably not permanent. They're probably temporary. And the new long lead outlooks for both September, which is on the top here, and the September through November period, these are fairly consistent with what we've seen in the past. Both of those outlooks on the left-hand side here call for warmer than normal mean temperatures. So another reason to think that this change that we're moving in here the next week or so is probably temporary. The precip forecasts updated are a little bit different. You can see that we're in the EC or equal chances category. So no real forecast direction on moisture yet or precipitation for this time frame. But I think the key message is still looking at likely a warmer than normal end of growing season and fall. Certainly the first part of the fall will be warmer than normal. So summarizing real quickly again, one more day of very summer-like conditions, but then the big change comes, and just as importantly, or more importantly, we are looking at the strong likelihood of showers and thunderstorms across much of the southern half of the state for a change. Temperatures dropping off at least 10 to 15 degrees here for the weekend, and then normal to below normal weather, at least mean temperatures here next week. The next chance after tomorrow and into early Saturday, the next chance for rain probably coming late on Monday or Tuesday. So again, a more active weather pattern sets up next week, and that's what leads into that medium range forecast where you could see above normal precipitation forecast. And then as we just saw here, long leads still do call for a return once again to warmer than normal conditions, probably as we move towards the middle of September and beyond. And as Dennis mentioned, again, a reminder for next week, join us once again for Dr. Manny Singh. We'll be speaking about corn mycotoxins, so don't miss that next Thursday. And with that, I will wrap up and send it back to Bob and see if we have any questions.
We did have one question for Jeff, but I'm having trouble getting to it.
Bob, let me help you out here with that question. It says for Jeff, you said potential ET or the PET, right, and the slide showed ET0.
Yes.
Are these two identical technically?
They are, and I'm sorry, but it's this is actually something that's used not just in the U.S. This approach, but it's used internationally. And what we're seeing, these are the same things. So the ET0, that's there are a couple different origins of this, but they're all using the same approach, and it results in, it's very confusing, which is unfortunate. But they do, this is all that reference evapotranspiration. They do point to the same value, even though they have different acronyms, and it's that is a confusing part, and it's just one you have to, I guess, remember over time. So unfortunately, they do have different names, but it's the same thing, reference evapotranspiration. So ET0 and then this PET, at least in this case, they're referring to the same thing.
So Jeff, I was looking at the U.S. drought monitor earlier in the week, and there's parts of southern Michigan starting to show up on there. Looks like maybe we're going to get a little bit of relief for those areas.
Well, that's an interesting story. And this has been a little bit of it's been an interesting, over the last several weeks, as you probably remember in our discussions, we've gone from over 50% of the state of Michigan in either D0 or D1, which is up to moderate drought here over the last couple of weeks, to now less than 10%, when at the same time, I think you could very effectively argue that there are many sections that never left D0 or D1 and should have been there. I think we may see some changes. Of course, that the next update of that is actually coming out within the next hour here this morning, and I do expect some changes. And unfortunately, I think they're going to be more of Michigan, at least for now, in drought categories than was the case last week, and probably should have been there last week as well. That's, again, it's not an easy thing to do, but to your point, given what is expected here over the next 1 to 2 days, yes, there should be some at least temporary relief or change to that, given how much rainfall is expected, and especially in those areas that really need it the most. But this unfortunate thing is, too, with the timing, of course, it's coming at the end of the season. It's too bad we couldn't have had that a few weeks before, but there likely will be quite a bit of change going on in that particular index over the next week or two. But this week, I suspect that we will see an increase and reflecting real conditions out there, or more accurately what we've seen, which is not so good. We've got some pretty dry spots, especially in the southern lower.
Yeah, are we on track for like to have one of the warmest summers that we've had, at least for a while? I know when I published the wheat report, I had 13 days above 90 degrees or at 90 degrees or higher during the grain fill period, and wheat shuts
Right.
down at 90 degrees. So
We've been watching that as well. And the bottom line is it is warmer than normal. But we've had several growing seasons that actually turned out to be warmer than this. One interesting piece of this is, though, especially as you go back to the early to middle part of the summer, and back to potential evapotranspiration, one of the variables we don't talk about as much, the rates of that were unusually high because it was sunny and relatively warm, and that's what drives that potential evapotranspiration. So while the air temperatures themselves, and the higher the air temperature, the higher the PET rates, but in general, while we were still warmer than normal, what really showed up was the high PET rates. And that definitely during the month of June and then into July. So our water use or potential water use rates early in the season were abnormally high this particular year. And it will vary. Almost certainly August is going to be warmer than normal statistically. Our growing season will definitely be warmer than normal if we end that at the end of August. Those will all go in the books. But it won't be a record or it won't be up in the top echelon, but it'll certainly be in that firmly within the warmer than normal category.
well, maybe we'll take this as a sign that we're going to have a good harvest season. We're not going to have rain hindering us, and I'll be able to get my wheat planted on time and whatnot.
It'd be hard to top last year for ill-timed weather. And remember, October was the wettest on record in some locations last year. And of course, that followed the fourth wettest spring on record as well across. So what happened last year hopefully won't be replicated again for a while statistically. And again, right, as you saw with the long leads right now, at least it's pointing in the right direction, and we shouldn't have nearly as much difficulty as we did last year.
Jeff, does your department track sunshine and the amount of cloudless days and that kind of thing? Because it seems like we've had a lot of sunshine this summer.
We have, and that directly follows my comment that is that and air temperature are the primary drivers of that water need. But it has been sunnier than normal, especially back during June and into the first part of July. But we do have numbers that show that. But solar radiation is a variable that not the National Weather Service actually there aren't as traditional records of this. We have it with our EnviroWeather network. It drives everything, photosynthesis and water use, etc. So we have it on our network, and we look at that, but we don't have nearly as many statistics available, unfortunately, because the time frame that we have it is limited. But we do now. We've got in some cases more than 20 years from our network here in the state. So that's how we know that it's been sunnier than normal. The variable that's been used for a long time by the National Weather Service, hours or minutes of sunshine, that only tells you it's a binary switch, and it looks at a relatively low level of sunshine and said if the hour is at that or above, it counts as a 1 and 0 if not. And that is related to how much sunshine, but you really need to know how much energy actually came over time, and that's what we measure. And that's what should be measured. That's what we really need for the system. So we do have some numbers on that, but they're just not as developed as we have for temperature or precip.